When the past knocks on your door after 2 decades, is it destiny or a second chance that could destroy everything all over again? The love you swore you had overcome can return when life thought you had already given up. What would happen if that single mistake were the only real chance for happiness? Before we begin, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, activate the bell, and hype the video to help the channel grow. Elliot Gibbons had not expected Camden to seem so small. 23 years away, had turned the town into something almost mythical in his memory, a place he had fled with the urgency of a man, escaping something he could not name. But now, driving past the faded sign that read, "Welcome to Camden, Maine, where the mountains meet the sea," he felt the weight of every mile collapse back onto him. The harbor appeared first, the gray-green water slapping against wooden docks that looked older than they had a right to be. Sailboats bobbed with lazy indifference. The air smelled of salt, pine, and something else. Something that only existed here in this corner of the world he had spent half a lifetime pretending did not matter. He parked the pickup truck in the gravel lot next to Gibbons Marine Construction, the family business that had shaped 3 generations of stubborn men who believed that work was prayer and silence was strength. The building itself was a testament to that philosophy. Brick and steel, no frills, built to last. His father had poured everything into this place. Elliot knew that because Bill Gibbons had never poured anything into his son except expectations. The office door opened before Elliot could reach it. Bill stood in the doorway, 78 years old and still broad-shouldered, though age had carved deep lines into his face that made him look like he had been arguing with time itself. "You're late," Bill said, which was not true, but accuracy had never been the point. "Traffic on Route 1, Elliot replied, stepping inside. The office smelled exactly as he remembered. Engine oil, paper that had yellowed in files no one ever opened. His father walked back to his desk with the careful gait of a man whose body had begun to betray him, but whose pride refused to acknowledge it. "We have the Hutchinson contract review at 2, Bill said, flipping through a stack of blueprints without looking up. "Matthews wants to discuss the proposal for the harbor restoration project, and the quarterly financial reports need your signature." He spoke as if Elliot had never left, as if 23 years could be compressed into one morning of paperwork. Elliot sat down in the chair across from his father's desk, the same chair he had sat in as a teenager when Bill had lectured him about responsibility, about legacy, about the difference between men who build things and men who let things fall apart. "I'll take care of it," he said, because it was what Bill wanted to hear, and Elliot had spent a lifetime learning his father's language, direct, transactional, void of anything that might resemble affection. "Good." Bill finally looked at him, and something passed over the old man's face. Not warmth, exactly, but perhaps recognition. "Your mother wants you for dinner tomorrow. She's been cooking since Tuesday." Elliot nodded. Abigail Gibbons had always been the opposite of her husband, soft where Bill was hard, open where he was closed. She had called 3 times a week for the last month, her voice gentle yet insistent, asking when he would be home. Home. The word still felt strange. They worked through the afternoon, reviewing contracts and timelines, falling into the rhythm of the trade that required no emotional vocabulary. Bill talked about clients, about margins, about the state, the docks after the last winter storm. He did not ask about Boston, about Elliot's life there, about why his son had stayed away so long, and Elliot said nothing either. Some silences were agreements, carefully kept over decades. When Elliot finally left the office, the sun was beginning to inch its way down toward the horizon, painting the harbor in hues of amber and rust. He drove through town, past the old post office, past the library where he had spent countless hours avoiding going home, past the diner where he cut that thought off before it could finish. Some roads did not need to be revisited. Not yet. Across town, in a converted warehouse that had been turned into a design studio, Angie Summers was losing an argument with a client who thought teal was the same as turquoise. "They are cousins, not twins," she said, her voice patient in the way that came from years of explaining color theory to people who thought paint swatches were interchangeable. She held up 2 samples side by side under the natural light streaming in from the studio's large windows. "Teal has more green, Turquoise pulls blue. For your space, with the north exposure, turquoise will look cold. Teal will bring warmth without overpowering the oak flooring. The client, a woman named Helen who had bought one of the old sea captain's houses on Chestnut Street, peered at the samples as if they might give up secrets under scrutiny. I still think they look the same, she said, but there was resignation in the tone. She had hired Angie for a reason. Trust me, Angie said, smiling in a way that was both professional and genuine. When it is on the walls and the afternoon light hits it just right, you will see the difference. She made a note on her tablet, adding the paint. Selection to the ever-growing list of decisions that turned empty houses into homes. Helen left 20 minutes later, reassured and carrying a folder of fabric samples Angie had pulled for the living. Room draperies. The studio went quiet. Angie's business partner, a sharp-tongued woman named Diane, had left earlier for a dentist appointment, which meant Angie had the space to herself. She liked, in that way sometimes, the silence, the light, the smell of wood samples and crisp linen fabrics. This place was hers in a way that mattered. She had built it slowly, carefully, out of something that resembled hope but required less optimism. She was 45 years old, which felt both impossible and exactly right. There were days when she still felt like the girl who had grown up in the house, on Bayview Street, full of dreams and an open heart. But most days she felt like who she actually was, a woman who had learned that survival meant constructing a life that did not require anyone else's participation. She had done that. The studio was proof. The small house she had purchased 3 years ago was proof. The fact that she could pay her bills and sleep through the night was proof. Her phone vibrated. It was a text from Nancy. Dinner Friday? I need wine and gossip. Angie smiled and typed back, my place, 7 p.m. Bring the wine. Nancy Allen had been her best friend since they were 14. Back when friendship meant sharing secrets in the dark and believing that the future was something you could mold just by wishing hard enough. They were still close, though the secrets were different now, smaller, more careful, polished by time. Angie locked up the studio and drove to her mother's house, a small Cape Cod on the edge of town that smelled of lavender and old books. Olga Summers was sitting on the enclosed porch when Angie arrived, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze somewhere far away. The Alzheimer's was still in the early stages, but the disease had already begun to steal pieces of her mother in ways that hurt more than Angie knew how to articulate. Hi, Mom, Angie said, settling into the chair next to her. How was your day? Olga turned slowly, her expression shifting from confusion to recognition in the space of a breath. Angie, she said, her voice soft. You look tired, dear. Long day, Angie admitted, but a good one. She reached out and took her mother's hand, the skin paper thin and cool. They sat like that for a while, watching the light change through the windows, neither of them needing to fill the silence with words. Then, Olga spoke, her voice suddenly clear in the way that sometimes happened, as if the fog lifted just enough for her to see through it. He's back, isn't he? Angie froze. Who's back? Elliot, Olga said, and the name hit Angie like something physical, sharp and immediate. I saw the Gibbons pickup truck in town this morning. I would recognize that truck anywhere. Her mother's eyes focused on her with an intensity that felt unnerving. You should talk to him. Mom, don't you mom me, Olga cut in, the tone firmer than it had been in months. That boy loved you, and you loved him. Whatever happened between the two of you, it has been long enough. Angie stood up, needing distance, needing air. It is complicated, she said, which was a cowardly way of saying she did not want to talk about it, did not want to think about Elliot Gibbons or the way he had left without explanation, or the years she had spent building a life that did not include him. Olga did not press. She rarely pressed, even before the illness, but her eyes stayed on Angie, knowing the way mothers always know. That night, alone in her house, Angie poured herself a glass of wine and sat on the back porch, the October air crisp against her skin. Camden was beautiful this time of year, the leaves turning gold and crimson, the harbor still bustling with the last of the season's tourists. She had lived here her entire life, save for the 4 years she had spent at the Rhode Island School of Design. She came back because her mother needed her, because this town was home, because leaving would have required a type of courage she did not possess. Or maybe she had come back because some part of her had never stopped waiting for him to come back too. She hated that thought, hated the weakness in it, the way it made her feel like that girl again. 22 years old and in love with a boy who had looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered, right up until the moment he decided she was not. Elliot had left Camden the summer after college, packed his bags, and moved to Boston, barely saying a word. No fight, no explanation, just gone. And Angie had spent more years than she liked to admit waiting for him to return, for him to explain, for him to say what she had done wrong. But he never came back, and eventually, she learned to stop waiting. So, if he was back now, it did not matter. It could not matter. Except that somewhere deep in the part of her that refused to be reasonable, she knew that was not true. The morning arrived cold and clear, the kind of weather that made Camden look like a painting. Elliot woke up in his parents' house, in the room that had been his during adolescence, and which Abigail kept exactly as he had left. Duty, a time capsule no one had asked to be preserved. He went downstairs and found his mother in the kitchen making coffee. "Good morning, darling," Abigail said, turning with a smile that lit up her entire face. She was a beautiful woman at 74, her gray hair pulled back in a loose bun, her blue eyes still bright. "Pancakes or eggs?" "Coffee is fine," Elliot replied, sitting down at the kitchen table. The wood was worn in the same places as always, marks from decades of meals and conversations, or the absence of them. Abigail placed a steaming cup in front of him and sat across the table, her hands wrapped around her own mug. "Your father has already left," she said, "meeting with the suppliers." She paused, studying her son with that quiet attention that always made him uncomfortable. "Did you sleep well?" "Well enough." "Elliot," she said, and there was something in her tone that made him look up. "I know coming back isn't easy. This town holds a lot of memories." He took a sip of coffee, using the time to choose his words. But Abigail had already moved on, as she always did when she knew she had touched on something her son was not ready to discuss. "I need to go to the market this morning," she said, getting up. "The pantry is almost empty." Elliot accepted because refusing would have required explanations he did not want to give. 20 minutes later, they were walking along the narrow downtown streets, Abigail greeting practically everyone who passed by. Camden had that small-town way where everyone knew everyone, where stories were. Currency and privacy was a rare luxury. The market was on Main Street, a red brick building that had been renovated to look rustic, but maintained the essence of a place where entire generations had shopped. Inside, the smell of fresh bread mixed with the aroma of ground coffee, and something sweet coming from the bakery in the back. Abigail grabbed a cart and began to walk through the aisles. With the efficiency of someone who knew every shelf by heart, Elliot followed her, his hands in his jacket pockets, observing more than participating. It was when they turned into the produce section that he saw her. Angie was standing near the apples, examining a Honeycrisp with the concentration of someone who took fruit very seriously. She wore dark jeans and a wine-colored sweater that highlighted her fair skin, her brown hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She was 45 years old and even more beautiful than he remembered, which seemed impossible and completely unfair. At the same time, his body reacted before his mind could process it. A wave of something warm and unsettling that started in his chest and spread. For a second, he considered backing away, pretending he had not seen her, avoiding whatever was about to happen. But then Abigail spoke, her voice clear and genuinely cheerful. "Angie?" Angie turned, and her face went through a rapid sequence of expressions. Surprise, recognition, and then something more cautious when her eyes met Elliot's. "Abigail," she said, and her voice was exactly as he remembered, soft but with a firmness underneath. "What a nice surprise." Abigail crossed the aisle and hugged Angie with the genuine affection of someone who had truly missed her. "I haven't seen you for a few days, dear. You look beautiful." She stepped back, holding Angie's shoulders. "How is your mother?" "Well, all things considered," Angie replied, and there was a layer of weariness in the answer that she could not completely hide. "The good days still outweigh the bad ones. That is what matters." Abigail turned, making a casual yet deliberate gesture toward Elliot. "You remember my son, don't you?" The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds, but it seemed to stretch. Angie looked at Elliot directly, without flinching, and he felt it like a physical impact, the weight of those brown eyes that had always seen, more than he wanted to show. "Elliot," she said, and the name on her lips carried too much history to fit into 2 syllables. "Angie," he replied. Abigail looked between the two of them with an expression that was part curiosity, part understanding. "Well, I am going to get what I need from the bakery," she said, pushing the cart with a studied naturalness. "I will meet you at the register." And then she was gone, leaving Elliot and Angie alone in the aisle, surrounded by rows of organic produce and an awkward silence that neither of them seemed to know how to break. It was Angie who spoke first. "So you came back. For now," Elliot said, and the answer sounded more defensive than he intended. "For now," she repeated, and there was something sharp underneath the words. "Well, Camden must be honored by the temporary visit." Elliot felt the barb like a hook, but he did not bite. "I came to take care of company business. My father is retiring." "Bill Gibbons retiring?" Angie arched an eyebrow. "I never thought I would see the day." "Age catches up to everyone." "It certainly does." She placed the apple back on the pile and crossed her arms, her entire body emanating a casual defense that he recognized. "It must be strange to be back after all this time." "It's different," he admitted, choosing the word carefully. "Different how?" Elliot hesitated. The truth was too complicated to summarize in a supermarket conversation, but the lie felt worse, smaller than I remembered. Angie let out something between a laugh and a sigh. "Funny, to those who stayed, it always seemed just the right size." The slight hit exactly where she intended. Elliot felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice level. "I did not come here looking for a fight, Angie." "No? Then what did you come looking for?" The question hung between them, too loaded to be answered honestly and too dangerous to be ignored. Elliot opened his mouth, then closed it again. There were so many things he could say, but all of them felt inadequate. Angie shook her head, and something that might have been disappointment passed across her face. "That is what I thought." She picked up the shopping basket at her feet and started to walk away. "Welcome back to Camden, Elliot. I hope you find what you are looking for." He should have let her go. It was the safest thing, the simplest. But something inside him, something old and stubborn, could not. "Angie, wait." She stopped, but did not turn around completely. "What?" He searched for the right words and realized they did not exist. "I am sorry for the way things ended. I should have explained." Angie finally turned, and her expression was impossible to decipher. 23 years later, and that is what you have to say? That you should have explained? I do not know what you want me to say. I do not want anything, Elliot. That is the point. Her voice was calm, but there was an undertow, something he recognized as old hurt. "You made your choice a long time ago. I made mine too. Life moved on." "Did it?" "It did," she confirmed, lifting her chin. "I built a career. I take care of my mother. I have friends, a house, a life that works without you." The words should have sounded like closure, but instead they felt incomplete, as if she had more to say and was holding back. Elliot knew that look, that stance. Angie had always been too transparent to hide what she truly felt, even when she tried. "I am glad you are doing well," he said, and he was sincere. The guilt he had carried all these years would not be alleviated by her suffering. "Thank you." Angie adjusted the basket on her arm. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have groceries to finish." This time, Elliot did not interrupt her. He stood in the produce aisle, watching her walk away, disappearing behind a shelf of cereals. He felt something uncomfortable settle in his chest. Not exactly regret, because regret suggested he could have done things differently. It was closer to recognition. Recognition that leaving Camden had not erased anything. It had only postponed it. Abigail appeared beside him a few minutes later, the cart full of breads and pastries. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked, and there was a layer of meaning in the question that had nothing to do with shopping. "I'm not sure what I am looking for," Elliot admitted. His mother studied his face for a long moment, then nodded as if she had confirmed something she already knew. "Well, when you figure it out, I hope you have the courage to go after it." They paid for the groceries and drove home in silence. Elliot carried the bags inside while Abigail began to put everything away in the cabinets with her usual skill. Bill had not returned yet, which meant the house was strangely quiet, only the sound of paper being crumpled and drawers being closed. "Elliot," Abigail said eventually, without looking at him, as her hands were busy organizing the soup cans. "Can I ask you a question?" "You can. Why did you really come back?" He could have given the obvious answer: the company, his father, family, responsibility. But Abigail did not deserve lies. "I do not know," he said honestly. "I thought I did, but now that I am here, now that you are here, you realize that Camden was always less about the place and more about what you left behind," she completed, finally looking at him. There was no judgment in her eyes, only understanding. "Angie was important to you. She still is. Mom, you do not have to tell me anything, darling. You just have to be honest with yourself." Abigail closed the cabinet and turned fully to him. "You have always been so much like your father. You keep everything inside, as if feeling things is a weakness. But it is not, Elliot. It is what makes us human." He did not answer, because he did not know how. Instead, he mumbled something about needing to check emails and went up to his room. He sat on the narrow bed, his laptop on his lap, but did not open it. Instead, he stared out the window at the quiet street, the trees swaying in the October breeze, and thought about Angie. Across town, Angie was sitting on her porch, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. Nancy was sitting beside her, her bare feet propped up on the railing. "So, let me see. If I got this straight," Nancy said, her voice drawn out and amused. "You ran into Elliot Gibbons in the produce aisle of the market and, instead of pretending you did not see him like a normal person, you decided to provoke him?" "I did not provoke him," Angie protested, but it sounded weak even to her own ears. "You said Camden was honored by his temporary visit. That is practically the definition of provocation." Angie sighed, sinking further into the chair. "He caught me off guard. I was not prepared to see him. No one is ever prepared to see an ex who disappeared without explanation," Nancy pointed out. "But you handled it well. You did not cry, you did not scream, you did not throw apples at him. That is progress." Nancy. "What?" "I am being supportive." Nancy sipped some of the tea, watching her friend with that keen look that came from 3 decades of friendship. "How did you feel when you saw him?" Angie took a long time to answer. The truth was too complicated, full of layers she did not want to unpack. "Confused," she said finally. "Annoyed. A little, I do not know. Displaced." "Displaced how?" "As if 23 years had suddenly disappeared. As if I were still that girl who stayed waiting for him to change his mind." Angie shook her head, frustrated with herself. "It is ridiculous. I grew up. I got over it." "Did you get over it?" Nancy asked gently. "Because, honey, if you had truly gotten over it, you would not be sitting here dwelling on it with me." Angie had no answer for that. Inside the house, she heard Olga moving, the soft sound of steps on the hardwood floor. Her mother had a good day today, lucid and present, but Angie knew that could change at any moment. Alzheimer's was like that, unpredictable, cruel in the way it stole pieces of a person little by little. "I am going to leave soon," Nancy said, standing up and stretching her arms. "But first, let me give you some unsolicited advice. As if I could stop you. Whatever you still feel for Elliot, anger, hurt, whatever it is, do not pretend it does not exist. It will only make things worse." Nancy placed her hand on Angie's shoulder, squeezing lightly. "You do not have to forgive him. You do not even have to talk to him again if you do not want to. But you have to be honest about what you are feeling, at least to yourself." After Nancy left, Angie stayed on the porch until the sun began to set. Camden was beautiful in the fall. It always had been. And Elliot was back, walking the same streets, breathing the same air, existing in the same small space she had carefully built over more than 2 decades. Life moved on, she had told him, and it had moved on. But now, sitting there alone with the cold beginning to bite, Angie wondered if any part of her had truly left that summer behind, or if she had only learned to live around it. 3 days after the encounter at the market, Elliot was sitting in the Gibbons Marine Construction office, reviewing contracts that seemed to be written in a language he had forgotten how to speak. The numbers made sense. The clauses were clear. But every time he tried to focus, his mind wandered to places it should not, to a supermarket aisle, to a wine-colored sweater, to the way Angie had lifted her chin when she said life had moved on. Bill entered the office, carrying a stack of blueprints, his face paler than it should have been. He let the papers drop onto the desk with a dull thud and leaned on the edge, breathing with more effort. "Dad," Elliot got up, something tightening in his chest. "Are you all right?" "I am fine," Bill grumbled, but his voice came out weak, lacking its usual conviction. "I just climbed the stairs too fast." Elliot did not believe him for a second. He rounded the desk and held his father's arm, feeling the slight tremor beneath the fabric of the shirt. "Sit down here. Now." To his surprise, Bill obeyed without arguing, sinking into the chair as if his legs could no longer support him. Sweat glistened on his forehead, and his lips had a slightly bluish tint that Elliot recognized from all the times he had studied first aid manuals without ever expecting to need to use them. "I'm calling the doctor," Elliot said, already grabbing his phone. "You do not need to make a fuss," Bill protested, but without real "Bree, it is just tiredness. I am 78 years old, not 20. And that is exactly why I am calling." Elliot dialed the number for the local clinic, ignoring his father's mumbling. 20 minutes later, they had an appointment scheduled for that same afternoon. Elliot canceled all meetings for the day and drove Bill home, where Abigail was waiting at the door with that expression mothers have when they know something is wrong before anyone even tells them. "What happened?" she asked, already guiding her husband to the living room sofa with a firmness that allowed no discussion. "Nothing happened," Bill said, but he allowed himself to be guided, which in itself was evidence enough that something was wrong. "Elliot is making a tempest in a teapot." "Elliot is being sensible," Abigail corrected, casting an appreciative look at her son. "You have an appointment with Dr. Patterson?" "At 3, Elliot confirmed. "I will take him." The rest of the afternoon unfolded in a succession of waiting rooms, exams, and medical conversations that Elliot listened to with increasing attention. The diagnosis was not severe. Cardiac arrhythmia, likely, caused by stress and age, treatable with medication and lifestyle changes. But it was enough to shake the illusion that Bill Gibbons was indestructible. "You need to slow down," Dr. Patterson said, looking over his glasses at Bill with the authority of someone who had been the family doctor for more than 30 years. "Less work, more rest, and I want you back here next week for reevaluation." Bill nodded, but Elliot knew that look. His father would agree to everything in front of the doctor and ignore half the instructions as soon as he left the office. It was Abigail who would have to deal with it, and Elliot felt a pang of guilt realizing that he had been leaving all the responsibility in his mother's hands for years. When they returned home, night had already fallen, bringing with it that October chill that made the air crisp. Abigail made soup, and the three of them ate in a silence that was not exactly comfortable, but was not hostile either. It was the kind of silence that came after a scare, when no one quite knows what to say. "I am going to need help with the company in the coming weeks," Bill said eventually, pushing the soup around his bowl without actually eating. "There is the harbor project that needs constant attention, and the Hutchinsons want a complete review of their boat restoration proposal. I will take care of it," Elliot replied immediately. "You do not know half the clients. You do not know how things work here now." Bill paused, his pride visibly fighting with his need. "I will need you to work with someone who knows Camden, who has a relationship with the people. Who do you have in mind?" Bill exchanged a look with Abigail, and something passed between them. A silent conversation that Elliot could not fully decipher. "Freddie Robin," his father finally said. "He does consulting for small businesses now. He knows everyone in town, he understands business. It would be good to have him helping with the transition." Elliot knew Freddie. They had been friends in adolescence, the kind who shared beers and conversations about the future, but they had lost touch over the years, and now the idea of working with someone who knew him before Boston, before all the armor he had built, made Elliot uncomfortable in a way he could not name. "All right," he said, because there was no other possible answer. "I will talk to him." The next morning, Elliot drove to the coffee shop Freddie had opened a few years ago on the waterfront. The Harbor Roast was in an old building that had been renovated Exposed bricks, large windows with a view of the harbor, the smell of freshly roasted coffee mixed with something that smelled like cinnamon and butter. The place was moderately full for a Wednesday morning, a mix of fishermen drinking coffee before heading out to sea, and retirees reading newspapers in quiet corners. Freddie was behind the counter, making latte art with the concentration of a surgeon. He was 48 years old, his hair beginning to gray at the temples, and he had the kind of face that aged well. When he looked up and saw Elliot, a wide smile spread across his face. "Elliot Gibbons," he said, his voice carrying a mix of surprise and something that could be satisfaction. "I heard you were back. I thought it was a rumor." "In the flesh," Elliot replied, extending his hand. Freddie ignored it and walked around the counter to pull him into a quick, firm hug, the kind men give when they want to show affection, but are afraid of seeming too sentimental. "Man, how long has it been? 10 years? Something like that," Elliot admitted, though he did not know exactly how many years it had actually been since they last saw each other at a Christmas Freddie had spent in Boston. "Sit down, I will make you a decent coffee. God knows you must have spent years drinking that office swill." Freddie returned behind the counter, his hands moving with practiced efficiency on the espresso machine. "I heard about your father. How is he?" "Stable. Needs to slow down, but you know him." "I do. The most stubborn man I have ever met, and I know many." Freddie finished the coffee and brought it to the table where Elliot had sat down. He sat on the other side. "So, I imagine you did not just come here for old time's sake." Elliot took a sip of the coffee. It truly was good, rich, and balanced, and went straight to the point. "My father needs help managing the company transition. He suggested you could consult, help maintain client relationships while I take over operations." Freddie studied his face for a long moment, those eyes that had always been uncomfortably perceptive. "Are you staying in Camden? At least until the transition is complete?" "That is not an answer. It is the only one I have." Freddie nodded slowly, as if processing more than the words. "All right, I can help. I have a few consulting clients, but nothing I cannot adjust. When do you want to start? The sooner the better." "Great. I can stop by the office tomorrow morning." He tilted his head slightly. "Have you run into Angie yet?" The question caught Elliot off guard, and he had to work hard to keep his expression neutral. "At the market a few days ago. And how was it?" "Polite." Freddie let out a short laugh. "Polite? That is interesting word to describe a reunion with someone you left without explanation 2 decades ago." Elliot felt the irritation rise. "It is none of your business, Freddie." "No, it is not. But this town is small, Elliot. Everyone knows your story, and everyone is curious to see how this will end now that you are back." Freddie leaned forward. "Look, I am not judging, but if you are going to be here for a while, you are going to run into her. A lot. It is inevitable." "I know. And are you prepared for that?" Elliot had no answer for that. The truth was that he did not know if he was prepared, did not know what it meant to be prepared to see Angie repeatedly, to exist in the same space as her without being able to go back and fix what he had broken. "I will have to be," he said finally. Freddie watched him for another moment, then nodded. "All right, tomorrow morning then. And Elliot, it is good to have you back, even if you do not plan to stay." When Elliot left the coffee shop, the sun was higher in the sky, breaking through the clouds in rays of light that made the harbor water gleam like liquid metal. He walked along the waterfront, trying to organize his thoughts, but they refused to cooperate. Everything in Camden seemed to conspire to remind him of Angie. The streets, the buildings, even the smell of salt in the air. Across town, Angie was at the studio trying to concentrate on a presentation for a new client when the phone rang. It was Abigail. "Angie, dear." The older woman's voice sounded tired in a way that immediately set off alarms. I'm sorry to bother you, but I need a favor." "Of course, Abigail, what do you need?" "Bill had a heart episode yesterday. Nothing serious, thank goodness, but the doctor told him to rest and reduce stress." Abigail paused, and Angie heard the sound of something being stirred in the background. "The problem is, we have the hospital benefit dinner on Friday. I was coordinating the decor, but with Bill like this, I cannot leave him alone. I know it is a lot to ask, but could you take over? You have much more talent for these things than I do anyway." Angie hesitated. The benefit dinner was an important event, something that involved a good part of the Camden community. It was also the kind of thing that would require meetings, coordination, and possibly crossing paths with people she would prefer to avoid. But it was Abigail asking, and Angie had never been able to say no to her. "Of course," she said, already mentally reorganizing her schedule. "Send me the details and I will take care of everything. You are an angel, dear. Thank you so much." The relief in Abigail's voice was palpable. "I will send you everything by email. And Angie, if you need help with anything, heavy or that requires strength, Elliot is available. He is going to be around here for the next few weeks anyway." Angie felt something unpleasant stir inside her. "It will not be necessary. I have vendor contacts who can help. Even so, if you need it." There was something in Abigail's voice, an intentional kindness that made Angie suspect that the arrangement was not as innocent as it seemed. After she hung up, she stared at the phone for a long moment. Nancy, who was at the next table reviewing fabric samples, looked up with a knowing expression. "Let me guess. Something involving the Gibbons? Abigail needs help with the benefit dinner. And nothing. I am going to help." "Angie." "What?" Angie turned to her friend, defensive. "Bill is sick. Abigail needs help. I am a decent person. Decent people help." Nancy put the samples aside and crossed her arms. "You know that means you are going to have to work with Elliot, right? Camden is too small for you two to keep avoiding each other. I am not going to work with him. I am going to work for Abigail. Keep saying that. Maybe you will convince yourself." Angie did not respond, turning her attention back to the computer. But Nancy was right, and they both knew it. Camden was too small to avoid someone indefinitely, and now, with Bill needing care and Elliot taking over the company, their paths were going to cross with a frequency she was not prepared to handle. On Friday night, the main hall of the town hall was transformed. String lights crossed the ceiling, creating a golden canopy over the tables, arranged in perfect circles. Angie had spent the last 2 days coordinating vendors, confirming the menu, ensuring every detail was perfect. She was tired, but satisfied. The space looked beautiful, elegant without being pretentious, welcoming without being too informal. She was adjusting a flower arrangement on one of the tables when she felt more than saw someone approach. She turned, and there was Elliot, wearing a dark gray suit that looked custom-made, his hair slightly messy as if he had run his fingers through it several times. He was more handsome than he had a right to be, and Angie hated that her body reacted to it, an inconvenient warmth rising up her neck. "Angie," he said, and his voice sounded softer than at the market, less defensive. "Elliot," she returned her attention to the flowers, adjusting petals that did not need adjusting. "Is your mother all right?" "She is. She and my father should arrive soon." He took a few steps closer, his hands in his pants pockets. "The place looks incredible. You have a talent for this." "Thank you," Angie replied, still not looking directly at him. She finished with the flowers and turned to check another table, but Elliot moved with her, keeping the distance between them short. "Angie, can we talk?" "We are talking. For real, I mean." Finally, she stopped and faced him. His eyes were still the same gray-blue, as ever, but now they held a raw truth, almost a silent request he did not dare formulate. "About what, Elliot? About how you came back to Camden and expect everything to be as it was before? About how you think a few vague apologies will erase 23 years? "I do not expect it to erase anything," he said, his voice low but firm. I do not know, a chance to explain." "Explain what? Why you left without saying anything? Why you never called, never wrote, never gave a sign of life?" Angie felt the frustration growing, that old anger she had worked so hard to bury. "You know what is funny, Elliot? I spent years imagining what I had done wrong, what I had said, how I had acted, what part of me was so inadequate that it made you run. You did nothing wrong. Then why did you leave?" The question hung between them, heavy and inevitable. Angie saw the conflict on his face, the desire to speak fighting with the instinct to protect himself. And then, as always, protection won. "It is complicated," he said, and it was the most cowardly answer possible. Angie let out a humorless laugh. "Of course it is." She picked up the box of supplies at her feet and started to walk away. I need to finish up here. People will start arriving soon. Angie. No, Elliot. She turned back, and this time she let him see the hurt. Let the mask fall for just a second. You had 23 years to explain. If you still do not know how, then perhaps you never will. She left him standing there, in the middle of the decorated hall, surrounded by golden lights and unfulfilled promises. And as she walked away, Angie felt the familiar weight of something that had never ended, only paused, waiting for the right moment to wake up and ache again. The week following the benefit dinner brought with it a routine that Elliot had not anticipated, a series of involuntary encounters that seemed orchestrated by the universe or the relentless nature of a small town. On Monday, he ran into Angie at the library where she was choosing books for Olga. On Tuesday, he saw her through the window of the harbor roast, talking with Freddie while having coffee. On Wednesday, they nearly collided at the post office door, and the brief contact, his shoulder brushing hers, sent an electric current down his spine that left him unsettled for the rest of the day. Elliot did not know if Angie felt the same, because she had become a master at avoiding him without seeming like she was avoiding him. She greeted him politely when necessary, kept conversations short and functional, and then disappeared before he could say anything more substantial. It was frustrating in a way he could not name, like trying to hold water with his hands. On Thursday morning, Freddie showed up at the Gibbons Marine Construction office carrying a box of donuts, and that expression Elliot had learned to recognize as, "I am going to say something you do not want to hear." "I brought coffee too," Freddie said, placing 2 large cups on the desk. "I figured you would need it after the meeting with the Hutchinsons yesterday." Elliot accepted the coffee gratefully. The Eisenhower meeting had been a controlled disaster. 3 hours of discussion over restoration details that Bill would have solved in 30 minutes if he had been there. But Bill was home following doctor's orders, which meant Elliot had to deal alone with clients who saw him as the Boston son, who knew nothing about boats. "It was awful," Elliot admitted, sinking into his chair. "They do not trust me." "It is not that they do not trust you. It is that they do not know you." Freddie bit into a chocolate donut. "Camden works like that. Trust is earned with time, not with a resume. I do not have time. My father needs this to work now." "Then you are going to have to speed up the process." Freddie leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "There is a fall festival next weekend. Half the town will be there. It is informal, everyone is relaxed. It would be a good time for you to show up, talk to people, show that you are not just Bill's son. You are someone who cares about Camden." Elliot considered it. The idea of spending an entire day smiling and making small talk with strangers sounded like torture, but Freddie was right. If he was going to stay in Camden, even temporarily, he needed the community's trust. "All right," he said, "I will go." "Great, and Elliot?" Freddie paused, choosing his words. "Angie is going to be there too. She always helps with the library fundraising booth, just so you know." "Why are you telling me that?" "Because you look like a deer about to be hit by a car every time her name comes up." Freddie smiled, but there was kindness beneath the teasing. "Look, I know your history is complicated, but the two of you are going to have to figure out a way to exist in the same space without looking like you are about to run away or fight." Elliot drank the coffee, using the time to organize his thoughts. "I tried to talk to her. She does not want to listen." "Do you really blame her?" "No." "Then maybe it is time to stop trying to explain and start showing." Freddie stood up. "Take the donuts, you are going to need the sugar." After Freddie left, Elliot was alone in the office, looking at the plans spread across the table without truly seeing them. Show, do not explain. The problem was that Elliot had always been better with actions than with words, but even actions had failed 23 years ago. Now he needed to prove he was different. But how do you show a change you are still learning to make? Across town, Angie was sitting on the enclosed porch of her house, watching her mother sleep on the sofa with a wool blanket over her legs. They had had a difficult morning. Olga had woken up confused, not recognizing her own house, insisting she needed to go back to her parents' farm that had long been sold. It took 2 hours to calm her down, to bring her back to the present with patience and gentleness that Angie did not know she still had in reserve. Nancy showed up with a paper bag, full of sandwiches from the deli on Main Street. "I came to feed you," she announced, walking in as she always did without knocking. I know you forget to eat when you are taking care of Olga. Do not forget, Angie protested weakly, but accepted the turkey sandwich gratefully. She had skipped breakfast and her stomach was complaining. Nancy sat next to her, watching Olga sleep. How is she? Today was bad, but it has passed now. Angie bit into the sandwich, the familiar flavor comforting. Thank you for this. That is what friends are for. Nancy paused, then said casually, Freddie told me Elliot is going to be at the fall festival. Angie stopped chewing. Why are you telling me that? Because you are going to be there too, and I thought it would be good for you to know so you do not get startled. I will not get startled. I am an adult. I can see Elliot Gibbons at a festival without having a breakdown. Angie took a sip of water, annoyed with herself for sounding defensive. No one said you were going to have a breakdown, but you have been tense every time his name comes up, and that is not healthy. I am not tense. Nancy arched an eyebrow. Your shoulders are practically up to your ears right now, Angie. Angie forced her shoulders down, taking a deep breath. All right, maybe I am a little tense, but it is normal, is not it? He shows up here, after 2 decades expecting, what, me to act like nothing happened? No, but maybe it is time to decide what you really want. Nancy turned, facing her friend directly. Do you want him to leave? Do you want him to stay? Do you want to talk to him or do you want to keep avoiding him until one of you leaves Camden? I do not know what I want. Then figure it out, because this limbo thing is not working for anyone. Angie did not answer, because Nancy was right and she hated it. The truth was that she did not know what she wanted. A part of her, the sensible, protective part, wanted Elliot to leave and take with him all the emotional confusion he had brought. But there was another part, smaller and more stubborn, that still remembered what it was like to be near him, how the world seemed to make more sense when they were together. The fall festival took place on a clear, cold Saturday, the kind of day that made Camden look like it was straight out of a postcard. Main Street had been closed to traffic, and colorful booths lined the sidewalk selling everything, from homemade pies to local crafts, from hot cider to maple syrup produced on nearby farms. Music played, from strategically positioned speakers, a mix of folk and country that fit the atmosphere perfectly. Elliot arrived around 10 o'clock in the morning, wearing jeans and a wool jacket that Abigail had insisted he bring. It is going to be cold later, she had said, and as always, his mother was right. He walked down the street, occasionally stopping to greet people who remembered him, or at least remembered who he was, with that mix of curiosity and reserve that small towns kept for those who return after a long time away. Freddie met him near the hot cider booth carrying 2 cups. I thought you could use this, he said, handing one to Elliot. And before you ask, yes, I put a little rum in mine. You drove, so yours is virgin. Thanks, Mom, Elliot said sarcastically, but took a grateful sip. The hot liquid went down his throat, chasing away the chill that had set in. They spent the next hour circulating the festival, Freddie introducing Elliot to people he did not remember or had never met. There were shop owners, fishermen, retired teachers, young couples with small children. Everyone was polite, most genuinely friendly, and some even mentioned the family, business with respect. Slowly, Elliot began to understand what Freddie had tried to tell him. Camden was not just a place. It was a network of connections, of intertwined stories, of people who cared about each other in ways that Boston had never offered. It was when he was talking to the local marina owner about dock maintenance that he saw her. Angie was at the library booth, organizing used books on makeshift shelves. She was wearing a thick mustard-colored sweater that highlighted the warm tone of her skin, her hair loose, falling over her shoulders in natural waves. There was something different about her today, more relaxed perhaps, or just more in her element. She smiled at a child holding a picture book, kneeling down to be at her height, explaining something that made the girl laugh. Elliot felt something tighten in his chest, a mix of nostalgia and longing that caught him completely off guard. 23 years had not changed the basics. Angie was still the most beautiful person he had ever seen, not just physically, but in the way she moved through the world with that genuine openness he had never managed to imitate. Are you just going to stand there, staring, or are you going to do something about it? Freddie's voice cut through his thoughts. Elliot turned, meeting his friend with an amused expression. I do not know what you are talking about. Of course not, and I was born yesterday. Freddie took a sip of his cider. Look, I am no relationship expert, but even I know that staring from afar solves nothing. She does not want to talk to me. Did you really try, or did you just give that vague excuse about things being complicated? Elliot did not answer, because they both knew the answer. Freddie sighed, placing a hand on his shoulder. Go over there, buy a book, donate to the library, be useful. And who knows, maybe the two of you can have a conversation that lasts more than 2 minutes without one of you running away. Before Elliot could think too much about it, and consequently find reasons not to, he walked toward the library booth. Angie had her back to him, rearranging a pile of novels when he arrived. An older woman, whom Elliot vaguely recognized as the town librarian, smiled at him. Can I help you? She asked, already reaching for a paper bag. I am just looking, Elliot said, but his eyes went straight to Angie, who had turned around upon hearing his voice. Surprise crossed her face, followed by something that might have been resignation. Elliot, she said, and there was weariness in her voice, as if seeing him was more work than she had the energy to deal with. You did nothing wrong. Then why did you leave? The question hung between them, heavy and inevitable. Angie saw the conflict on his face, the desire to speak fighting with the instinct to protect himself. And then, as always, protection won. It is complicated, he said, and it was the most cowardly answer possible. Angie let out a laugh devoid of humor. Of course it is. She picked up the box of supplies at her feet and started to walk away. I need to finish up here. People will start arriving soon. Angie, no, Elliot. She turned back, and this time she let him see the hurt. Let the mask fall for just a second. You had 23 years to explain. If you still do not know how, then perhaps you never will. She left him standing there, in the middle of the decorated hall, surrounded by golden lights and unfulfilled promises. And as she walked away, Angie felt the familiar weight of something that had never ended, only paused, waiting for the right moment to wake up and ache again. The week following the benefit dinner brought with it a routine that Elliot had not anticipated, a series of involuntary encounters that seemed orchestrated by the universe or the relentless nature of a small town. On Monday, he ran into Angie at the library, where she was choosing books for Olga. On Tuesday, he saw her through the window of the Harbor Roast, talking with Freddie while having coffee. On Wednesday, they nearly collided at the post office door, and the brief contact, his shoulder brushing hers, sent an electric current down his spine that left him unsettled for the rest of the day. Elliot did not know if Angie felt the same, because she had become a master at avoiding him without seeming like she was avoiding him. She greeted him politely when necessary, kept conversations short and functional, and then disappeared before he could say anything more substantial. It was frustrating in a way he could not name, like trying to hold water with his hands. On Thursday morning, Freddie showed up at the Gibbons Marine Construction office carrying a box of donuts, and that expression Elliot had learned to recognize as, I am going to say something you do not want to hear. I brought coffee too, Freddie said, placing 2 large cups on the desk. I figured you would need it after the meeting with the Hutchinsons yesterday. Elliot accepted the coffee gratefully. The meeting had been a controlled disaster, 3 hours of discussion over restoration details that Bill would have solved in 30 minutes if he had been there. But Bill was home following doctor's orders, which meant Elliot had to deal alone with clients who saw him as the Boston son who knew nothing about boats. It was awful, Elliot admitted, sinking into his chair. They do not trust me. It is not that they do not trust you. It is that they do not know you. Freddie bit into a chocolate donut. Camden works like that. Trust is earned with time, not with a resume. I do not have time. My father needs this to work now. Then you are going to have to speed up the process. Freddie leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. There is a fall festival next weekend. Half the town will be there. It is informal. Everyone is relaxed. It would be a good time for you to show up, talk to people. Show that you are not just Bill's son. You are someone who cares about Camden. Elliot considered it. The idea of spending an entire day smiling and making small talk with strangers sounded like torture. But Freddie was right. If he was going to stay in Camden, even temporarily, He needed the community's trust. "All right," he said. "I will go." "Great. And Elliot?" Freddie paused, choosing his words. "Angie is going to be there too. She always helps with the library fundraising booth. Just so you know." "Why are you telling me that?" "Because you look like a deer about to be hit by a car every time her name comes up." Freddie smiled, but there was kindness beneath the teasing. "Look, I know your history is complicated, but the two of you are going to have to figure out a way to exist in the same space without looking like you are about to run away or fight." Elliot drank the coffee, using the time to organize his thoughts. "I tried to talk to her. She does not want to listen. Do you really blame her? No. Then maybe it is time to stop trying to explain and start showing." Freddie stood up. "Take the donuts, you are going to need the sugar." After Freddie left, Elliot was alone in the office, looking at the plans spread across the table without truly seeing them. Show, not explain. The problem was that Elliot had always been better with actions than with words, but even actions had failed 23 years ago. Now he needed to prove he was different. But how do you show a change you are still learning to make? Across town, Angie was sitting on the enclosed porch of her house, watching her mother sleep on the sofa with a wool blanket over her legs. They had had a difficult morning. Olga had woken up confused, not recognizing her own house, insisting she needed to go back to her parents' farm that had long been sold. It took 2 hours to calm her down, to bring her back to the present with patience and gentleness that Angie did not know she still had in reserve. Nancy showed up with a paper bag full of sandwiches from the deli on Main Street. "I came to feed you," she announced, walking in as she always did without knocking. "I know you forget to eat when you are taking care of Olga." "I do not forget," Angie protested weakly, but accepted the turkey sandwich. Gratefully, she had skipped breakfast and her stomach was complaining. Nancy sat next to her, watching Olga sleep. "How is she?" "Today was bad, but it is past now." Angie bit into the sandwich. The familiar flavor comforting. "Thank you for this. That is what friends are for." Nancy paused, then said casually, "Freddie told me Elliot is going to be at the fall festival." Angie stopped, chewing. "Why are you telling me that?" "Because you are going to be there too, and I thought it would be good for you to know so you do not get startled." "I will not get startled. I am an adult. I can see Elliot Gibbons at a festival without having a breakdown." Angie took a sip of water, annoyed with herself for sounding defensive. "No one said you were going to have a breakdown, but you have been tense every time his name comes up, and that is not healthy." "I am not tense." Nancy arched an eyebrow. "Your shoulders are practically up to your ears right now, Angie." Angie forced her shoulders down, taking a deep breath. "All right, maybe I am a little tense, but it is normal, is not it? He shows up here after 2 decades expecting what? Me to act like nothing happened? No, but maybe it is time to decide what you really want." Nancy turned, facing her friend directly. "Do you want him to leave? Do you want him to stay? Do you want to talk to him? Or do you want to keep avoiding him until one of you leaves Camden?" "I do not know what I want." "Then figure it out. Because this limbo thing is not working for anyone." Angie did not answer, because Nancy was right, and she hated it. The truth was that she did not know what she wanted. A part of her, the sensible, protective part, wanted Elliot to leave and take with him all the emotional confusion he had brought. But there was another part, smaller and more stubborn, that still remembered what it was like to be near him, how the world seemed to make more sense when they were together. The fall festival took place on a clear, cold Saturday, the kind of day that made Camden look like it was straight out of a postcard. Main Street had been closed to traffic, and colorful booths lined the sidewalks selling everything, from homemade pies to local crafts, from hot cider to maple syrup produced on nearby farms. Music played from strategically positioned speakers, a mixture of folk and country that fit the atmosphere perfectly. Elliot arrived around 10 o'clock in the morning, wearing jeans and a wool jacket that Abigail had insisted he bring. "It is going to be cold later," she had said, and as always, his mother was right. He walked down the street, occasionally stopping to greet people who remembered him, or at least remembered who he was, with that mix of curiosity and reserve that small towns kept for those who return after a long time away. Freddie met him near the hot cider booth, carrying 2 cups. "I thought you could use this," he said, handing one to Elliot. And before you ask, yes, I put a little rum in mine. You drove, so yours is virgin. Thanks, Mom, Elliot said sarcastically, but took a grateful sip. The hot liquid went down his throat, chasing away the chill that had set in. They spent the next hour circulating the festival, Freddie introducing Elliot to people he did not remember or had never known. There were shop owners, fishermen, retired teachers, young couples with small children. Everyone was polite, most genuinely friendly, and some even mentioned the family business with respect. Slowly, Elliot began to understand what Freddie had tried to tell him. Camden was not just a place. It was a network of connections, of intertwined stories, of people who cared about each other in ways that Boston had never offered. It was when he was talking to the local marina owner about dock maintenance that he saw her. Angie was at the library booth, organizing used books on makeshift shelves. She was wearing a thick mustard-colored sweater that highlighted the warm tone of her skin, her hair loose falling over her shoulders in natural waves. There was something different about her today, more relaxed perhaps, or just more in her element. She smiled at a child holding a picture book, kneeling down to be at her height, explaining something that made the girl laugh. Elliot felt something tighten in his chest, a mix of nostalgia and longing that caught him completely off guard. 23 years had not changed the basics. Angie was still the most beautiful person he had ever seen, not just physically, but in the way she moved through the world, with that genuine openness he had never managed to imitate. Are you just going to stand there staring, or are you going to do something about it? Freddie's voice cut through his thoughts. Elliot turned, meeting his friend with an amused expression. I do not know what you are talking about. Of course not. And I was born yesterday. Freddie took a sip of his cider. Look, I am no relationship expert, but even I know that staring from afar solves nothing. She does not want to talk to me. Did you really try, or did you just give that vague excuse about things being complicated? Elliot did not answer because they both knew the answer. Freddie sighed, placing a hand on his shoulder. Go over there. Buy a book. Donate to the library. Be useful. And, who knows, maybe the two of you can have a conversation that lasts more than 2 minutes without one of you running away. Before Elliot could think too much about it, and consequently find reasons not to, he walked toward the library booth. Angie had her back to him, rearranging a pile of novels when he arrived. An older woman, whom Elliot vaguely recognized as the town librarian, smiled at him. May I help you? She asked, already reaching for a paper bag. I am just looking, Elliot said, but his eyes went straight to Angie, who had turned around upon hearing his voice. Surprise crossed her face, followed by something that might have been resignation. Elliot, she said, and there was weariness in her voice, as if seeing him was more work than she had the energy to deal with. Angie. He picked up the first book he saw, a biography of some president he had never heard of. How much is it? $5. But you do not have to buy something just because I am here. I am not buying it for that reason. I am buying it because I want to support the library. He handed a $10 bill to the librarian. You can keep the change as a donation. The woman accepted, with a grateful smile, and disappeared inside the small mobile booth, leaving Elliot and Angie with an illusion of privacy in the middle of the crowd. You do not even know what that book is about, Angie pointed out, crossing her arms. It is about John Adams, it says on the cover. It is about John Quincy Adams, his son. There was a trace of amusement in the correction, and Elliot clung to, like a man clinging to a life vest. Well, now I will learn something new. Angie shook her head, but something in her softened slightly. What are you doing here, Elliot? And do not tell me it is for the festival. Freddie thought it would be good for me to show up, meet people, show that I care. And do you care? The question should have been simple, but there were layers beneath it. Elliot chose honesty. I am starting to. Before Angie could answer, a feminine voice called, Angie, I need you over here. It was Nancy, waving from another booth further down. Angie cast a look at Elliot, something complicated that he could not fully decipher, then grabbed her coat. I have to go, she said. Enjoy the book. Elliot stood still, watching her walk away, frustration and something akin to hope fighting inside him. He was putting the book in the bag when Abigail appeared beside him, carrying a sack full of fresh vegetables. "Buying literature?" she asked with that gentle tone that concealed sharp perception. "Supporting the library?" "Of course." Abigail looked in the direction Angie had gone, then back at her son. "You know, when you were 17 years old, you used to spend hours at the library just to be near her. You thought I did not know, but a mother always knows." Elliot felt heat rise up his neck. "Mom, I am not judging, darling. Just observing." She adjusted the sack in her arms. "Angie has always been special, and you have always been terribly stubborn. It is an interesting combination. I have no idea what to do with this. Start by being honest, with her and with yourself." Abigail touched his arm lightly. "Your father and I are going to lunch at the diner. Want to join us?" Elliot accepted, grateful for the distraction. But throughout the entire lunch, while Bill complained about having to eat salad instead of bacon, while Abigail told stories about the neighbors, while the movement of the festival continued outside the windows, Elliot could not stop thinking about Angie, the way she had corrected the book with that touch of humor, the question she had asked, "Do you care?" The answer was yes. He was starting to care, and that scared him more than he cared to admit. The day continued its pace until late afternoon, when the festival began to wind down and people started packing up the booths. Elliot had offered to help dismantle some structures, a way to make himself useful and secretly an excuse to stick around. He was carrying a folding table when he saw Angie struggling with a large box of books that clearly weighed more than she had anticipated. Without thinking much, he crossed the street. "Let me help." Angie looked up, surprised. "You do not have to." "I know I do. Not have to. But you are going to hurt your back trying to carry that alone." He was already taking the box from her hands before she could protest further. The weight was considerable, but nothing he could not handle. "Where is this going?" "To the library van over there." Angie pointed to a vehicle parked a few feet away, then followed as Elliot carried the box. Nancy was there, carrying another smaller box, and smiled when she saw them approaching. "Elliot Gibbons being chivalrous," she commented, clearly amused. "Who would have thought?" "Nancy," Angie said in a warning tone, but her friend only smiled wider. Elliot placed the box on the floor of the van carefully, straightening his back. "Is there more?" "Two more," Angie admitted, and there was something in her voice. Not gratitude exactly, but perhaps recognition that he was trying. They worked in silence for a few minutes, Elliot carrying the heavy boxes while Angie and Nancy organized everything inside the vehicle. When they finished, Nancy announced that she needed to go get something, leaving Elliot and Angie alone again. "Thank you," Angie said finally, leaning against the side of the van, "for the help." "No need to thank me." Elliot hesitated, then decided to risk it. "Angie, about what you asked earlier if I care. The answer is yes. I am starting to care about Camden, and I am trying to figure out what that means." She studied him for a long moment, those brown eyes searching for something on his face. Why now? Why not 23 years ago? It was the question he knew would come sooner or later. And this time, instead of deflecting or giving a vague answer, Elliot forced himself to be honest. "Because 23 years ago I was a coward. I was 27 years old and I was terrified by the intensity of what I felt. My father had spent his whole life telling me that emotions were distractions, that a man needed to be controlled, focused, and when I realized that you were becoming more important than anything, more important than the plans, the career, the expectations, I panicked." Angie did not say anything for a moment. When she spoke, her voice came out low, but firm. "You hurt me, Elliot. Not just by leaving, but by the way you left. No explanation, no goodbye. You left me thinking I had done something terribly wrong. You did nothing wrong. Never." Elliot felt something tighten in his chest. Not exactly pain, but close to it. "And I know apologies do not change the past, but I want you to know that leaving you was the biggest mistake I ever made, and I have spent the last 23 years paying for it." Angie blinked, and for a second Elliot thought she was going to cry, but then she swallowed hard and straightened her shoulders. "I do not know what to do with that," she admitted. "I do not know if I believe you. I do not know if I trust you. And I definitely do not know if I can forgive you. I am not asking for forgiveness. Not yet. I am just asking for A chance to show that I am no longer that boy who ran away. Nancy returned before Angie could answer, and the moment broke. But as Elliot started to walk away, Angie called out to him, "Elliot." He turned. "Thank you for being honest." And there was something in the way she looked at him. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the smallest opening, a sliver of light in a door that had been locked for 2 decades. Elliot drove home as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. His hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, not from cold, but from something deeper. He had exposed the truth, taken off the armor, let Angie see the wound he had carried all these years. And she had not run away. She had not forgiven him. But she had not completely closed the door either. It was a start, small, fragile, but a start nonetheless. November arrived in Camden bringing the true cold, the kind that turned breath into mist, and made the harbor take on metallic gray tones. Nearly 4 weeks had passed since the fall festival, and in that time something had changed. Not drastically, not in a way that could be pointed to at a specific moment, but changed nonetheless. Elliot and Angie had developed a kind of cautious truce, punctuated by brief conversations at Freddie's coffee shop, polite nods when they crossed paths on the street, and a tacit acknowledgement that perhaps they could exist in the same space without everything collapsing. Elliot was in the office on a gray Tuesday when the phone rang. It was Abigail, and something in her voice made him drop his pen immediately. "Elliot, darling, I need you to go to Olga Summers' house, now." He was already standing up, grabbing his keys. "What happened?" "Angie called me. Olga had a bad episode. She is confused, agitated, and Angie cannot calm her down alone. Nancy is in Portland visiting her sister, and I promised I would send someone." Abigail paused. "I know things between you two are complicated, but Angie needs help, and you are the closest person." Elliot did not hesitate. "I am on my way." He drove to Olga's house with his eye, heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with speed. When he arrived, the front door was ajar. He stepped inside, calling softly. "Angie?" Her voice came from the back of the house, tense. "Here." He found the two of them in the living room. Olga was sitting on the sofa, her hands trembling, her eyes distant and frightened, in a way that squeezed something inside him. Angie was kneeling in front of her mother, holding those trembling hands, her voice soft but with a layer of exhaustion underneath. "Mom, you are home. This is your house. You are safe here with me." "I do not know this place," Olga said, her voice rising in panic. "Where is my father? He will worry if I do not go back. I need to go home." Angie looked up as Elliot approached, and relief mixed with something akin to shame crossed her face. She did not want to need him, Elliot realized, but she did need him, and that made everything more complicated. "Olga," Elliot said gently, kneeling beside Angie. Olga stared at him with those confused eyes, searching for recognition. "It is me, Elliot. Elliot Gibbons. Do you remember me?" Something flickered across Olga's face, a spark of memory cutting through the fog. "Elliot, Abigail's boy?" "Yes, that is right." He kept his voice calm, steady. "You are home, in your house here in Camden. Angie is here with you. You are safe." "Angie." Olga turned to her daughter, and slowly recognition returned. "My Angie." "Yes, Mom, your Angie." Angie's voice trembled slightly, but she held steady. "It is all right. You just got a little confused, but it is passing now." It took another 20 minutes to fully calm Olga, to bring her back to the present with patience and kindness. Elliot stayed there, helping however he could, fetching water, adjusting the blanket over Olga's shoulders, just being a solid presence Angie could lean on. Eventually, Olga fell asleep on the sofa, exhausted by the episode. Angie rose slowly, her legs visibly shaky after kneeling for so long. Elliot instinctively held her elbow when she swayed slightly. "Easy. I am fine," she murmured, but did not immediately pull his hand away. When she finally did, she walked to the kitchen, Elliot following her. She filled a glass with water and drank it all at once, her back against the sink, her eyes closed. "Thank you," she said finally, "for coming, for helping." "No need to thank me. I do, you had no obligation." Angie opened her eyes and something exposed was in them now, something she usually kept hidden. This is the third time this week. The episodes are getting more frequent. Elliot did not know what to say that would not sound empty, so he opted for honesty. That must be exhausting. It is. Angie let out a humorless laugh. But she is my mother. I do not have another choice. There is always a choice. There are places, professionals. I will not put her in a home. Angie interrupted, her voice hardening. I am sorry. I know you are. Trying to help, but she is my responsibility. Elliot understood that viscerally. The stubborn loyalty, the need to carry the burden alone. It was exactly how he had lived his entire life. You do not have to do everything by yourself, Angie. Do I not? She stared at him. Because I have been doing this for years, and it has worked fine until now. Has it worked? Or did you just convince yourself it worked because it was easier than asking for help? The words came out harsher than he intended, but they hit home. Angie blinked, then looked away. You have no right to judge me. I am not judging. I am acknowledging, because I do the same thing. Elliot took a step closer to Angie, lowering his voice. I spent my whole life locking everything away, pretending I could handle it, alone. And it worked right up to the point where it destroyed the only thing that truly mattered. Angie looked up at him, and there was something different in her gaze now. Not anger, but something softer, more dangerous. Why are you doing this? Doing what? This. Showing up, helping, saying the right things. Why now? Elliot could have given a safe answer. Something about being friends or wanting to help, but he was tired of safe answers. Because I realize now what I did not realize before, that going through life alone is not strength, it is fear, and I have wasted too much time being afraid. The silence that fell between them was heavy, loaded with everything that had not been said in 2 decades. Angie opened her mouth to respond when they heard Olga stirring in the living room. The moment broke. Angie quickly left the kitchen, checking on her mother, and Elliot followed at a respectful distance. She will be fine, Angie said. She just needs to sleep. You need to sleep too. When was the last time you slept through the night? Angie did not answer, which was answer enough. Elliot made a decision. I am staying. Elliot, I am not asking for permission. I am staying here, sleeping on the sofa just in case she wakes up again and you need help. He crossed his arms, making it clear he was not open to negotiation. You can argue with me or you can accept the help and finally get some rest. Angie studied him for a long moment, then sighed. The living room sofa is more comfortable. I will get blankets. 3 hours later, the house was quiet. Olga had been moved to her room, sleeping deeply with the aid of mild medication. Angie had finally gone to her room, although Elliot doubted she was actually sleeping. He was lying on the sofa, staring at the ceiling, when he heard light footsteps. Angie appeared in the doorway of the living room, wearing flannel pajamas and a thick cardigan. Cannot sleep? I am not great at sofas. Liar. You are worried. She crossed the room and sat in the armchair beside the sofa. Me too. I keep listening for every sound, expecting her to wake up confused again. That is why I am here. Angie pulled her knees up, hugging her legs. There was something vulnerable in her posture, something she rarely showed. Can I ask you a question? You can. Back then, when you left, did you really love me? The question cut through all the defenses Elliot still maintained. He could have evaded. He could have given a vague answer. But if there was a moment for complete honesty, this was. He sat up on the sofa, turning to face her directly. Yes, he said, and the word came out rough. I loved you so much it terrified me, and everything in my life was planned. The job in Boston, the career my father wanted for me, the future that was supposedly inevitable. And then there was you, who made that whole plan seem empty. You were real in a way nothing else was. And I did not know how to handle it. Angie did not say anything for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was low. I would have gone with you, to Boston, wherever you went, if you had asked. I know, and that made it all worse. Elliot ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with his own inability to adequately explain. My father spent my entire life telling me that emotions were weaknesses, that a real man stayed in control, and when I realized I was losing control with you, that I woke up thinking about you, that I made plans that included you, That I wanted you more than I wanted anything else? I panicked. I thought if I stayed, if I let that grow, I would become weak, dependent, everything my father taught me not to be. So you ran away. I ran, and I spent the next 23 years proving to myself that I had made the right decision. I built the career, I earned the money, I conquered all the things that supposedly mattered. And in the end, I realized I had built a life that meant nothing because you were not in it. Angie quickly wiped her face, and Elliot realized there was moisture in her eyes. Do not do that, she said. Do not say those things if you do not plan on staying. What if I do plan on it? Do you? Elliot got up from the sofa, closing the distance between them. He knelt in front of the armchair where she was sitting, forcing her to look into his eyes. I came to Camden thinking it was temporary, a few months to sort out the company things and then go back to Boston. But the longer I spend here, the more I realize that Boston was never home. It was just where I was hiding. Elliot, let me finish. He took a deep breath. I do not know if you can forgive me. I do not know if you can trust me again. But I need you to know that this time I am not running away. I am staying in Camden. I am taking over the company, and I am going to spend all the necessary time proving that I am no longer that coward from the past. Angie stared at him, emotions crossing her face so quickly that it was impossible to catalog them all. Why? Why now, after all this time? Because seeing you again reminded me of what truly matters. And because I finally understand that courage is not never feeling fear. It is feeling fear and choosing what matters anyway. And you matter, Angie. You always mattered. The silence that fell was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of the clock on the kitchen wall. Angie lowered her feet from the armchair, placing them on the floor, which brought her closer to Elliot. He could feel her warmth now, see the small golden flecks in her brown eyes. I never stopped, Angie said finally. So low, Elliot barely heard her. Loving you, I mean. I tried. God knows I tried. But some part, me always stayed stuck in that summer, waiting for you to come back and explain. Something broke inside Elliot. Some final wall he had kept standing. Angie. No. She placed her fingers on his lips, stopping the words. Let me finish. You hurt me in a way that took years to heal, and I am still not sure if it has completely healed. But I also cannot pretend anymore that I feel nothing. That seeing you does not move me. That some part of me does not want to believe that this time can be different. Elliot took the hand that was still close to his face, turning to kiss her palm with a reverence that surprised them both. It will be different, I swear to you. Do not make promises you cannot keep. I am not. I am making one that I intend to spend the rest of my life keeping. And then, because words had failed once and he was not going to let them fail again, because the space between them had shrunk until it disappeared, because 23 years was too long. Waiting, Elliot kissed her. It was not gentle, it was not hesitant. It was 2 decades of pent-up desire, of regret, of love that had never truly died, only slept. His hands went to her face, his fingers sliding through her hair, pulling her to him with a need that bordered on desperation. And Angie responded with the same intensity, her hands grasping his shirt, her mouth opening under his. In an invitation that Elliot accepted with silent gratitude. The kiss was everything. Apology, promise, declaration, regret, longing. It was the taste of salty tears that Elliot did not know were his or hers. It was the sound of ragged breaths, of small moans neither of them tried to suppress. It was the feeling of finally being in the right place, with the right person, at the right time. When they finally separated, it was just enough to breathe. Their foreheads remained touching, their eyes closed, as if opening them would break the spell. Elliot, Angie whispered, and the name came out like a prayer, like forgiveness, like a beginning. I am here, he replied, kissing her forehead, her eyelids, the tip of her nose with a tenderness that contrasted with the intensity of the previous kiss. And I am not going anywhere. She opened her eyes then, and Elliot saw everything there. Fear, hope, love, caution. He saw the 22-year-old girl he had left, and the 45-year-old woman she had become. He saw past and future coexisting in the same look. I am scared, Angie admitted. To believe this, to believe you, I know, and I will do whatever. It takes for as long as it takes to earn that trust back. Elliot held her face between his hands, forcing her to maintain eye contact. But you need to know one thing. That boy who ran away, he died somewhere in the last 23 years. The man who is here now is a man who finally understands what truly matters, and he is going to do everything differently this time. Angie studied his face, looking for lies, for hesitation. When she found none, something in her yielded. Not completely, but enough. She kissed him again, slower this time, exploring, relearning, and Elliot allowed, it maintaining the pace she set, letting her take control, proving with actions what words could not fully express. They stayed like that for an impossible time to measure, kissing, touching, whispering things that were half promises and half confessions. His hands traced the contours of her face as if memorizing it, his thumbs caressing her cheekbones with a gentleness that made Angie tremble. Her hands were intertwined in his hair, keeping him close as if letting go would mean losing her courage. It was Elliot who eventually pulled back, though every fiber of his body protested against it. I need to go slow, he said, his voice rough, because if I do not stop now, I will not be able to stop. Angie let out a low laugh that sent warmth straight through him. Who said I want you to stop? Angie. It was a warning, a plea, a prayer. I am serious. She kissed his jawline, his neck, that sensitive spot right behind his ear, that her memory apparently still knew. I spent 23 years without you. I do not want to wait anymore. Elliot groaned softly, his hands tightening on her waist. Every instinct screamed to take what she was offering, to lose himself. In her the way he had fantasized countless times. But some part of him, the part that had grown, that had learned, knew that this was too important to rush. I want you, he said against her mouth, letting her feel the truth of it in the way his body reacted. God, Angie, you have no idea how much. But when it happens, and it will happen, I want it to be because you are completely sure. Not because you are emotional or tired or needing comfort. I want it to be because you chose this. You chose us. Angie drew back just enough to look into his eyes, and there was something new there now. Respect, perhaps, or admiration. When did you get so sensible? When I realized what I had lost, and what I would risk losing again if I did not do things right this time. She nodded slowly, then settled against his chest, tucking her head under his chin. Elliot wrapped his arms around her, breathing in the scent of shampoo and something that was uniquely her. They remained like that, intertwined in the armchair that was definitely not made for two people, but worked anyway. Stay with me tonight, Angie murmured against his chest. Just stay. It does not have to be more than that. I will stay, Elliot promised, kissing the top of her head, for as long as you want. Eventually they moved to the larger sofa, Angie lying against Elliot, covered by a heavy comforter she had fetched. His body was solid and warm behind her, his arm around her waist possessive yet gentle. And there, in the darkness of the living room with the clock ticking the hours and Olga sleeping, safely in her bedroom, Angie finally let down her last defenses. Elliot, if you run away again, I will kill you. He chuckled softly, the sound vibrating through his chest against her back. Noted? I am serious. Elliot tightened his arm around her even more, as if wanting to merge her with his own body. You are stuck with me now, Angie Summers, for better or worse. He paused, his voice dropping, becoming raw. I love you. I have always loved you. All those years away, all those thousands of miles between us, none of that changed a thing. Do you know why I never married? Why I could never build anything with anyone else? He turned her face to him, wanting her to see the truth in his eyes even in the darkness. Because none of them were you, and my stubborn, idiotic heart always knew none of them would be. And my love, it was always and will always be yours. You have not proposed to me yet, Gibbons. Do not get ahead of yourself. Not yet, he agreed, and there was a promise in his voice. But I will. Angie smiled in the dark, feeling something that had been absent for years finally returning. Hope. Not the naive hope of youth, but the mature hope of someone who had survived disappointment and chose to believe anyway. It was terrifying and exciting at the same time, this possibility of a fresh start. Elliot? Yes? I love you too. In case? That was not clear. He felt more than heard his breathing stop, then restart unevenly. He turned her face to him, kissing her again, slower now, with a reverence that made something inside her completely melt. It was clear, he murmured against her lips, but you can repeat it as many times as you like. I love you, she whispered. I have always loved you, even when I hated you. I know, and I am going to spend the rest of my life earning it. They eventually fell asleep, intertwined uncomfortably, but perfectly, the sound of each other's breathing more comforting than any. Silence. And when the sun began to rise, they both woke up together, something they had not done in 23 years, but that somehow felt like the most natural thing in the world. Angie turned in. His arms, studying the face she knew so well, and was simultaneously rediscovering. There were new lines around his eyes, a few silver streaks in his dark hair, but it was Elliot, the same Elliot she had loved at 22, just more weathered, more real, more human. Good morning, he murmured, his eyes still closed but the corner of his mouth curving into a smile. Good morning, she replied, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingers. Did you sleep well? How is your back? That sofa was not made for two. I slept better than I have in years. Liar. Truth. He opened his eyes and there was something there that made her heart race. Because you were here. Angie felt heat rise in her face. After everything, he could still make her blush. You have gotten corny in your old age. Just honest. Elliot pulled her in for a morning kiss, then grimaced. We need to brush our teeth. She laughed, the sound coming out free and genuine in a way she had forgotten was possible. Romantic. Practical, but after we brush, I will go back to being romantic, I promise. They got up slowly, reluctant to break contact. Angie went to check on Olga, who was still sleeping, peacefully, her breathing soft and regular. She sent a message to Nancy explaining the situation, omitting some important details, and received back an eye emoji and 3 exclamation points. When she returned to the living room, Elliot was making coffee in the kitchen, rummaging through her cabinets with the familiarity of someone who felt at home. And that was it, Angie realized with a shock that was not unpleasant. Elliot here in her house making coffee as if he belonged, as if the last 23 years were just a long, painful detour until they got back here. I hope you like strong coffee, he said, handing a steaming mug to her. Because it is the only way I know how to make it. Angie took a sip and smiled. Perfect. They drank coffee sitting at the kitchen table, their fingers intertwined in the space between them, talking about small and important things at the same time. His plans for the company, her next project at the studio, how they would handle all of this with the whole town watching. It was different from the intense conversations of the night before. Lighter, but no less significant. They are going to talk, Angie pointed out. All of Camden is going to talk. Let them talk. Elliot squeezed her hand. I do not care what people say. I only care about you. Abigail is going to be happy. My mother is probably going to start planning the wedding the moment she finds out. We are not even officially together, and you are already talking about marriage. We are not? Elliot tilted his head, genuinely confused. Because after last night, I thought it was pretty clear. Elliot Gibbons, did you just ask me to be your girlfriend? I think so, although dating seems like too much of a teenage word for what we are. He stood up, walked around the table, and pulled her to her feet too. Angie Summers, I am asking you to rebuild this with me, to give a second chance to what we should have had the first time. He hesitated, then decided on complete honesty, to let me spend the rest of my life making up for the years I wasted away from you. Angie felt something tighten in her chest. Not pain, but the opposite. Fulfillment. That was kind of a proposal. Not yet. When I propose to you, you will know. It is going to be unforgettable. Elliot kissed her forehead. But yes, I am asking you to be mine, officially. So there are no doubts in your head or in the head of anyone in Camden. Possessive, she murmured, but she was smiling. When it comes to you, absolutely. Angie wrapped her arms around his neck, letting her full body weight rest against him. All right, she said against his chest. Yes, we can try this, but Elliot? If you run away, you will kill me. I get it. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. But I will not. This is a promise I intend to keep, Angie, because I spent too much time without you, and now that I have you back, there is nothing in this world that will make me leave. She believed him. Maybe it was naivete, maybe it was hope, maybe it was just being tired of being alone. But when she looked into his blue-gray eyes and saw the determination there, the raw, exposed sincerity, Angie chose to believe. They kissed again, slower now, savoring it, because they had time. All the time in the world, finally. And when Olga woke up, 1 hour later, lucid and peaceful, she found her daughter and Elliot having coffee in the kitchen, their hands intertwined across the table, smiling at each other as if they shared a secret that the rest of the world was still discovering. "About time," Olga murmured, accepting the cup of tea that Angie prepared. And although the disease was taking so much from her, in that moment she smiled, with all the clarity of a mother who sees her daughter finally happy. And Elliot, looking between the two women, felt something he had not felt in 23 years. He felt at home. December transformed Camden into something straight out of a Christmas card. Light snow covered the rooftops, wreaths adorned the Main Street lampposts, and the smell of cinnamon and pine hung in the cold air. 3 weeks had passed since that night at Angie's house, and in that time she and Elliot had navigated the first steps of rebuilding something that had been interrupted so long ago. It was not perfect. There were moments of hesitation, difficult conversations about expectations and fears, nights when Angie woke up with a racing heart, questioning if she was being naive. But every time the doubt arrived, Elliot was there, solid, present, proving with small and consistent actions that he was not the man who had run away. One Saturday morning, Elliot was in the Gibbons Marine construction office, reviewing the transfer contracts that would formalize the complete transition of the company to him. Bill had finally, reluctantly, agreed to truly retire. The last few weeks had brought more mild cardiac episodes, nothing serious, but enough to scare him into accepting that 79 years required rest. The door opened and Freddie walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I brought fuel. You are going to need it to survive what is coming." Elliot looked up from the papers. "What is coming?" "Your mother is planning a Christmas dinner. And when I say dinner, I mean event. There will be at least 20 people, including half the company clients, the Allens, and obviously Angie and Olga." Freddie sat down, clearly enjoying Elliot's discomfort. "Welcome to life in Camden, where your personal life becomes public entertainment." "Excellent," Elliot murmured, but there was no real irritation. He had gotten used to the small-town nature of Camden, to the way everyone knew everyone else's business, and surprisingly, he did not care as much as he thought he would. "How are things with Angie?" Freddie asked, taking a sip of coffee. "Good. Better than I have." "A right to expect." Elliot leaned back in his chair. "She still has moments when she is cautious, but she is trying. We are trying. And you? Still thinking about going back to Boston?" "No." The answer came without hesitation. "I sold the apartment there last week. I am looking for something here, something permanent." Freddie nodded in approval. "Good. Because if you broke her heart again, you would have to answer to me, and to Nancy, and probably half the town." "Understood." "Great. Now, about the Morrison contract." Freddie opened a folder, and the two of them dove into business. Discussions that occupied the next hour. It was strange, Elliot thought, how this had become natural. Working with Freddie, managing the company, being part of the fabric of Camden. There was not the prestige of Boston, the money that came from dealing with large corporate accounts. But there was something more substantial: purpose, community, the feeling of building something that mattered. Across town, Angie was in the studio with Nancy, putting the final touches on a project for a Victorian house being restored near the harbor. Nancy was examining wallpaper samples, but kept casting occasional glances at her friend with that expression Angie had learned to recognize as, "I need to talk about something." "Just say it," Angie said eventually, without looking up from the tablet, where she was adjusting a design. "Say what? Whatever is making you look at me like that for the last 10 minutes? Nancy chuckled. "All right. How is it going with Elliot? Really?" Angie set the tablet aside, considering the question honestly. "It is strange. Strange good, but strange. Like we are trying to figure out how to fit new versions of ourselves into an old story. And is it Working? I think so. He shows up when he says he will show up. He calls when he says he will call. He helped change the light bulb on my mother's porch without me asking. Small things, but Angie paused. Consistent. Consistency is good. Consistency is what matters. Nancy leaned on the desk, her expression becoming more serious. Are you happy, Angie? The question should have been simple, but it carried weight. Angie thought about the last few weeks. The mornings she woke up to messages from Elliot, the impromptu dinners when he showed up with Chinese food after she spent the whole day caring for Olga, the way he kissed her as if she were the only thing in the world that mattered. Yes, she said finally. I am starting to be. Starting? I still get scared sometimes. That he will wake up one day and realize he made a mistake, that Camden is too small, that I am too complicated with my mother's situation, that… Angie, Nancy interrupted gently, you need to stop looking for reasons why it will not work and start believing that it can work. I am trying. I know. Just do not self-sabotage, all right? You two deserve this second chance. That evening, Angie was preparing dinner at her house when Elliot arrived, knocking lightly before entering. They had established this routine. He would come over a few nights a week. They would cook together or order food. They would spend time with Olga when she was lucid, and then they would be intertwined on the sofa watching movies. Smells good, Elliot said, kissing her. It was a simple kiss, familiar, but it still sent warmth through her. Herb roasted chicken. Your mother's recipe, actually. She gave it to me last week. Angie turned back to the stove, stirring the sauce. She said if I was going to steal her son, I should at least feed him properly. Elliot laughed, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. My mother is planning a Christmas dinner. No. She invited me yesterday. She invited you before she told me? Apparently so. Angie turned in his arms, resting her hands on his chest. Are you ready for us to officially become public? Entertainment? With you by my side, absolutely. They were interrupted by Olga entering the kitchen, wearing her flannel robe and with her hair pulled back in a loose bun. She had had a good week, more lucid than usual, and smiled when she saw the two of them. Elliot, dear, are you staying for dinner? If you will have me, Mrs. Summers. Olga, please. She sat down at the table, observing them with that look that seemed to see past the surface. It is good to see my girl happy again. It has been a while. The three of them ate dinner together, the conversation flowing easily between stories of old Camden and plans for the future. This was family. Not perfect, not without complications, but real. After dinner, when Olga went to her room, Elliot helped Angie wash the dishes. They worked in silent synchronization. He washed, she dried, their shoulders occasionally brushing in the narrow kitchen space. My father wants to talk to me, Elliot said eventually. Tomorrow, he said. It is important. Angie heard the tension in his voice. Are you worried? I do not know. My father and I are not very good at important conversations. He rinsed the last plate, placing it in the drying rack. It is probably about the company, final certifications, that sort of thing. Or maybe it is more than that. Elliot looked at her. What do you mean? Your father is getting older. He has health issues. Maybe he wants to say things he has never said before. Angie dried her hands on the towel, turning to face him directly. You and he, there are a lot of unsaid things between you. That is the way we have always worked. It does not mean it has to continue that way. Elliot considered this, then nodded slowly. You are right, as always. Always? Angie smiled. I will. Remind you of that the next time we disagree about something. Please do. He pulled her close, kissing her forehead. Thank you for letting me be part of your life again. I know it has not been easy. It is worth it, she answered simply, and felt him relax against her. The next day, Elliot drove to his parents' house in the late afternoon. The temperature had dropped drastically and snowflakes were starting to fall, light and sparse. He found Bill in the living room, sitting in his favorite armchair with a blanket over his legs. His father seemed smaller somehow, more fragile, and Elliot felt something tighten at the sight of it. Sit down, Bill said, gesturing to the sofa. There was not the usual roughness in his voice, just weariness. Elliot sat, waiting. Abigail, appeared briefly, placing tea in front of the two of them, then disappeared with a meaningful look at her husband. Bill took a sip of the tea, then put the cup back down with hands that trembled. Slightly. "I am not good at this," he began, "never have been. Your grandfather was not with my father and I was not with you, but your mother reminded me that I am going to be 79 years old, and if I do not speak now, I might not get another chance." Elliot said nothing, just waited. "I was hard on you, I know that. I thought I was preparing you for the world, making you strong. But what I really did was teach you to suffocate everything that mattered." Bill looked at his own hands. "And because of that, you lost Angie. Because of my mistakes. Dad, let me finish." Bill looked up, and there was something in his eyes that Elliot rarely saw. Remorse. "I saw you two that summer before you left for Boston. I saw the way you looked at her, and instead of encouraging you, of telling you that it was normal, that it was good to love like that, I said you were distracted, that you needed to focus, that emotions made men weak. You were trying to protect me. I was condemning you." Bill took a deep breath, the sound raspy in his lungs. "And I spent the last 23 years watching my son build an empty life because I taught him that love was weakness. It was my mistake, Elliot, not yours." Elliot felt something break in his chest, some barrier he had kept up since childhood. "I did not know you saw it that way. I did not. Not until I almost died. Few weeks ago. And your mother told me that if I did not fix things with you, she would kill me before my heart had the chance." A small smile crossed Bill's face. "Your mother can be terrifying. When she wants to be, she can. What I am trying to say clumsily is that I am proud of you, of the man you have become, and especially of the man you chose to be by coming back and fixing what was broken." Bill leaned forward. "Angie is good for you, always has been. Do not mess this up again." "I will not." Elliot ran a hand over his face, processing everything. "Thank you, Dad, for saying that. I know it was not easy. Nothing worthwhile is easy. You taught me that, ironically." Bill extended his hand, and Elliot took it, squeezing gently. "Now go. I am sure you have better things to do than spend the night with a grumpy old man." Elliot left his parents' house feeling lighter than he had felt in years. He drove straight to Angie's house, needing to see her, to share this with someone who would understand what it meant. He found her on the back porch, wrapped in a thick blanket, watching the snow fall. He sat beside her, pulling her close to him. "I talked to my father, and you were right. There were things that needed to be said, and they were." Elliot kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for pushing me in that direction. That is what I am here for." They stayed like that for a while, watching Camden become covered in white, the silence comfortable between them. It was in these moments, Elliot thought, that he realized how much he had changed. The old Elliot would have found this tedious, a waste of time. But now, sitting here with Angie, there was no place he would rather be. The following week brought Abigail's Christmas dinner, and she had not exaggerated in calling it an event. The Gibbons house was transformed, lights twinkling on every surface, a massive tree dominating the living room, the smell of roasted turkey and apple pie filling the air. People started arriving around 6 o'clock, and soon the house was full of conversations, laughter, and the chaotic noise of many voices competing at once. Elliot was in the kitchen helping Abigail when Angie arrived, bringing Olga. She wore a dark green dress that enhanced her eyes, her hair loose in soft waves. Elliot felt something familiar and warm rush through him, not just desire, though there was that, but something deeper. Pride, gratitude, love. "You look beautiful," he murmured when he got close to help with the coats. "You do not look bad either," she replied, adjusting his tie with a smile. It was an intimate domestic gesture, and Elliot noticed that several people were watching with ill-concealed interest. Nancy and Freddie arrived together, bringing wine and more food than 20 people could eat. "We did not want to show up empty-handed," Nancy explained, handing everything to Abigail. Bill was settled in his armchair, accepting greetings with the grace of a king receiving subjects. But when Angie approached to greet him, something in his face softened. "Angie, dear, I am glad you came. Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Gibbons." "Bill, please." And I am not the one you should thank. It was my wife who organized all this." He paused, then added low enough for only her to hear, "Take care of my son. He needs someone like you." Angie blinked, surprised, then smiled. "I will take care of him." The dinner was chaotic and perfect at the same time. 23 people squeezed into a dining room, made for 12, dishes being passed in every direction, conversations overlapping. Elliot was sitting next to Angie, his hand occasionally finding her thigh under the table, a touch of reassurance that both of them needed. It was Freddie who proposed a toast, standing up with his glass of wine in hand. "I wanted to thank Abigail and Bill for this incredible evening, and I also wanted to make a toast to new beginnings, to second chances, and to having the courage to fix what was broken." He looked directly at Elliot and Angie. "To you two, to new beginnings," everyone repeated, raising their glasses. After dinner, as people scattered around the house in small groups, Elliot pulled Angie onto the front porch. It was cold, but the fresh air was welcome after the heat of the crowded house. "Surviving?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Better than that. I am enjoying it." Angie leaned against him. "Your mother is incredible. All of this. It is incredible. It is a lot, but it is Camden. It is." She turned in his arms. "Are you sure this is what you want? The small town life, the chaotic dinners, everyone in everyone else's business? Are you sure this is what you want?" He returned the question. "A man with baggage, a complicated relationship with his own father, someone who has hurt you before? I already told you. I am willing to try." Angie touched his face, tracing his jawline with her thumb. "But sometimes I need to hear that you are too." "I am more than willing. I am committed." Elliot took her hand, kissing her palm. "Angie, I did not come to Camden just for the company. I came because somewhere in my subconscious, I always knew I left the most important thing here. And now that I have you back, I am going to make everything right this time. Prove it." "What?" "Prove it." There was challenge in her eyes, but also trust. "Not with words, with time, with presence. Prove that this is real. I will spend the rest of my life proving it if necessary." Angie smiled. And it was that smile Elliot remembered from their youth. Open, genuine, full of hope. "That is all I am asking." They kissed there on the porch, with the snow falling around them and the muffled sound of laughter coming from inside the house. And when they finally went inside, they found Abigail watching through the window with that look of a satisfied mother. The days between Christmas and New Year's passed in a pleasant haze of normalcy. Elliot continued working on the company transition, now with Bill's full support. Angie kept the studio running while balancing the care for Olga, who continued to have good and bad days. And together, they built a routine that felt sustainable, real. On New Year's Eve, instead of going to the downtown festivities, Elliot and Angie stayed at her house. Olga was spending a few days with Claire, her older sister who lived in Rockport, and had insisted on taking Olga to give Angie a rest. On good days, Olga still recognized her sister, and Claire knew exactly how to handle the difficult moments. For the first time in weeks, Elliot and Angie had the house completely to themselves. "So," Angie said, bringing 2 glasses of champagne into the living room where Elliot was lighting the fireplace, "we have the whole house. No interruptions. What are we going to do with it?" Elliot stood up, taking the glasses and placing them on the side table. "I have a few ideas." "Oh, really?" He pulled her close, resting his hands on her waist. "But first I need to tell you something. That sounds serious." "It is, but good serious, I hope." Elliot took a deep breath. "I put an offer on a house, that blue Victorian on Elm Street that was for sale." Angie blinked. "The big house with the porch? That is the one. It has enough space for an office, extra bedrooms for for the future." He hesitated, and Angie noticed the disarmed sincerity that escaped in that instant. "I want to build a real life here, Angie. Not just for now, forever." "Elliot, wait. There is more." He took something from his pocket, a small red velvet box. Angie felt her heart accelerate. "I am not proposing yet," he quickly said. "I know it is too soon for that, but I want you to have this. It is the promise that I will ask, when the time is right, when you are ready." He opened the box, revealing a beautiful ring, white gold with a solitaire diamond, elegant and timeless. Angie felt something tighten in her throat. "It was my grandmother's," Elliot explained. "My mother gave it to me last week. She said she would want you to have it when the time comes." "It is beautiful," Angie whispered, lightly touching the ring but not taking it out of the box. "So, do you accept the promise that there is a future here for us?" Angie looked from the ring to Elliot, seeing all the sincerity, all the hope, all the love exposed on his face, and she realized that the fear had lessened. It had not completely disappeared, maybe it never would, but it was no longer as great as the desire to try. "I accept," she said. "I accept." "The promise." Elliot closed the box and handed it to Angie, then kissed her with an intensity that made her knees weak. It was promise and celebration, patience and desire. It was everything. "Happy New Year," he murmured against her lips as the church bells began to toll midnight in the distance. "Happy New Year," she replied, and for the first time in 23 years, she believed that the new year would bring something good. They spent the night intertwined on the sofa, talking about dreams and plans, about the house Elliot wanted to buy, and how they could decorate it together, about trips they wanted to take, books they wanted to read, the life they wanted to build. And when they eventually went up to the bedroom, it was with the certainty that this, them, was real, lasting, right. In the following weeks, Camden watched Elliot and Angie build their relationship with the quiet approval that small towns reserve for happy endings. Freddie made jokes about how Elliot had finally grown up. Nancy stopped asking worried questions and started cracking jokes about marriage. Abigail knitted for Angie as if she were already part of the family, and Bill nodded approvingly. Whenever he saw the two of them together, it was a story Camden would tell for years, about the boy who ran away and the man who came back, about the woman who waited and the second chance they deserved. It was not perfect. There were still difficult days, tough conversations, fears that needed to be worked through, but it was real, built on a foundation of honesty and commitment that had not existed the first time. And on a February afternoon, when the snow finally began to melt and the first signs of spring appeared on the horizon, Elliot took the small blue box from his pocket as they walked along the harbor. There was no audience, no grand production, just the two of them, the sound of the waves, and a question he finally had the courage to ask. "Angie?" She turned and saw the box in his hand, open, the ring shining under the weak winter sun. She saw the man she had loved, lost, and found again, and she knew, without any doubt, what her answer would be. "Yes," she said, before he even asked. "Yes, Elliot. 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly, then kissed her there on the dock, with Camden watching from the windows and smiling along. And if anyone asked Elliot Gibbons about regrets, he would say yes, he had many. But coming back to Camden, facing the past, and winning back the woman he should have chosen from the start, that was not on the list. That was the best decision he had ever made. And when Angie Summers, soon to be Gibbons, looked toward the future, she no longer saw uncertainty. She saw a blue house on Elm Street, chaotic dinners with friends and family, growing old next to a man who had learned that love was not weakness, but the greatest strength of all. She saw home. Finally, completely, she saw home. The Victorian house on Elm Street had been transformed over the course of 2.5 years into something neither of them could have created alone. It was a perfect blend of Elliot and Angie, his pragmatism meeting her creativity, resulting in a space that was functional and beautiful at the same time. Elliot's office occupied the north-facing bedroom, overlooking the harbor. Angie's studio took up the entire east wing, flooded with natural light that she used to work on projects that now came not only from Camden, but from neighboring towns. One June afternoon, with the sun painting everything in golden hues, Angie was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she felt Elliot's arms around her waist. He smelled of sea and honest labor. He had spent the day at the docks overseeing the restoration of a historical yacht. "Long day?" she asked, tilting her head back against his shoulder. "Productive." He kissed her neck, that sensitive spot, just below her ear that still made her shiver after all these months. "I missed you." We saw each other at breakfast. 8 hours ago, an eternity. There was humor in his voice, but also sincerity. Elliot had become surprisingly good at expressing what he felt, although he still preferred actions over words most of the time. Angie turned in his arms, raising her hands to his face. There were more lines around his eyes now, a few additional silver streaks in his hair. He was 53 years old and looked more handsome than he had at 27, weathered by time in a way that made him more real, more human. "How are you?" he asked, and Angie knew he was not asking about her day. He was asking about what truly mattered. "Good," she answered honestly. Olga had passed, away 6 months ago, peacefully in her sleep, and the grief still came in occasional waves. But Elliot was always there to catch her when the waves got too high. Today was a good day. Great. He kissed her softly, then pulled back. "Are Freddie and Nancy coming for dinner?" "At 7 o'clock, together, obviously." Angie smiled mischievously. Who knew that spending so much time complaining about the two of us would make them realize they had chemistry? Freddie swears it was his idea from the start. Said he always found Nancy attractive. Nancy says the exact same thing, that she always found Freddie charming. Angie rolled her eyes, amused. Neither of them will admit that we essentially became accidental matchmakers. We are good at it. We should start a business. Summers and Gibbons Love Consultancy? It has a good ring to it. Elliot pulled her closer to him. But now we have 1 hour before they arrive with all that annoying new couple energy. A whole hour. Angie turned off the stove with a deliberate motion, her eyes sparkling. "What will we do with it?" Elliot's smile was slow and promising. "I have a few ideas." "Show me." He did not need any more invitation. He took her hand and led her upstairs. And there was no rush this time, no desperate urgency. Just the deep, satisfying knowledge that they had time. They had each other. They had this. Making love at 48 and 53 was different than at 22 and 27. There was less rush and more attention, less insecurity and more confidence. They knew each other's bodies now, every scar, every mark, every place that elicited sighs. And there was something profoundly intimate in that knowledge, in that familiarity that never became boring. Afterward, lying, intertwined in the tousled sheets, Angie traced lazy patterns on Elliot's chest. He held her close, his fingers making slow circles on her lower back. "Are you happy?" she asked, her voice sleepy and content. "Immensely." He kissed the top of her head. "Are you?" "More than I thought was possible." Angie propped herself up on her elbow, looking down at him. "Do you know what I realized the other day?" "What?" "That I do not regret it, any of it, not even the years we spent apart." As she said it, she saw surprise cross his face, because if it had not happened that way, we would not be who we are now. You would not be the man who learned that emotions are strength. I would not be the woman who learned that trusting again is possible. And this, she gestured between them, would not be so deep. Elliot pulled her back, kissing her with an intensity that still surprised her. "I love you," he said against her lips. "More every day. I did not know that was possible, but it is. I love you too." Angie snuggled against him. "Now get up, we have to finish dinner before Freddie and Nancy arrive and catch us like this. Let them wait. Elliot Gibbons, you are becoming irresponsible in your old age. I am becoming happy, there is a difference." Eventually they got up, dressed, and returned to the kitchen. They worked together with the efficiency of years of practice. He finished the salad while she checked the roast in the oven. When the doorbell rang at 7 o'clock sharp, the table was set and the house smelled of garlic and rosemary. Freddie and Nancy arrived bringing wine and dessert, as they always did. The four of them had developed this routine, rotating dinners every week, each couple taking turns as host. It was simple, but it meant a lot. "You two have that post-sex glow," Nancy announced as soon as she walked in, making Angie choke on her wine. "Nancy!" Angie protested, but she was laughing. "What? It is a compliment. It means the marriage is healthy." Nancy hugged her friend. "And considering you got married less than 2 years ago, it is good to see the honeymoon phase is still strong. Strong and healthy." Freddie agreed, shaking Elliot's hand. "Although I would prefer not to have visual images, thank you." They ate dinner in the dining room that Angie had decorated with the same care she put into all her projects, wallpapers in soft tones, restored antique furniture, candles creating a warm and inviting light. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and friendly teasing. "How is Bill doing?" Nancy asked eventually, becoming serious. Elliot exchanged a look with Angie before answering. "Frail. The doctors say it is a matter of months, not years. But he is at peace with it. He has spent the last few weeks putting things in order, having conversations he should have had decades ago." "And you?" Freddie asked gently. "How are you coping?" "Better than I would if I had not had these last few years with him. We managed to not fix everything but build something new, something honest." Elliot felt Angie's hand find his, squeezing. "I am grateful for that. Is Abigail all right?" Nancy asked. "Surprisingly, yes. She says she had 56 happy years with him, and that is more than most people get." Angie smiled sadly. "She is stronger than she looks." The conversation eventually shifted to lighter topics. Freddie's plans to expand the cafe, the new design project Angie had landed, the latest Camden gossip that Nancy always somehow had. It was comfortable, familiar, exactly the kind of friendship that sustained lives. When Freddie and Nancy finally left near midnight, promising to repeat next week, Elliot and Angie cleaned the kitchen into a companionable silence. These were the quiet moments that Elliot loved the most. No need to fill every second with conversation, just existing together. "Come," he said when they were done, taking her hand and leading her to the back porch. The night was clear, stars dotting the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Elliot sat in the wide rocking chair they had bought specifically for two, pulling Angie onto his lap. She settled against him, fitting her head onto his shoulder perfectly. "Do you know what scares me sometimes?" Angie said quietly. "What?" "How easy this is, being with you, loving you, as if the last 2.5 years erased all those decades of separation." Elliot considered that. "I do not think it erased it. I think it transformed it. Those years made this more precious, because we know what it is like to live without it." "When did you get so wise?" "When I married a woman who forces me to think about things." He kissed the top of her head. "But you are right about one thing, it is easy. It should not be after everything, but it is, and do you know why?" "Why?" "Because it is right. It always was. It just took me 23 years to stop running from it." Angie turned to face him, even in the dim light. "No regrets?" "One," Elliot admitted, "that I did not do this 23 years ago. But even that regret makes sense now. Because it led to this, to you here in my arms, wearing my last name, building a life with me. So maybe even the wrong paths have purpose when they lead you to the right place." Elliot Gibbons, philosopher in his spare time, husband in love full-time. He kissed her, slow and deep. "My beautiful, intelligent, talented wife, who by some miracle gave me a second chance. Third chance, technically. But who is counting?" Angie smiled against his lips. "And it was not a miracle, it was a choice. Every day I wake up and I choose this. I choose you. I choose us. Every day I am thankful that you choose." They stayed like that until the stars began to fade with the approach of dawn, rocking gently, whispering things that only they needed to hear. And when they finally went back inside, going up the stairs hand in hand, it was not to sleep. It was to lose themselves in each other the way only lovers who almost lost each other can do. Because this was what mature love meant. Not the blind intensity of youth, but the conscious choice to love despite knowing every flaw, every fear, every scar. It was the comfort of hands that knew exactly where to touch and the excitement of still discovering new things. It was looking at the face next to you on the pillow and feeling gratitude for a second chance that almost did not exist. Elliot kissed Angie that dawn, with the reverence of someone who knows exactly the treasure he holds, and she touched him with the confidence of someone who no longer needs to fear. They were complete. They were whole. They were exactly where they were supposed to be. 23 years waiting for this, and every second was worth it. If this story stirred something inside you, share your opinion in the comments and say whether you believe in second chances. Would you like to experience a reunion like this, or do you prefer to leave the past where it is? Comment. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel and hype this story now. It helps immensely to reach new people.